Designers have their work cut out for them when they choose to incorporate vehicular choices, the ability for a player to select how they want to interact with the game via character or deck choices. Each choice needs to feel as effective and flavorful as the others, otherwise there's no reason to play it. And no choice should be so strong that it seems pointless to choose any other. So how do we design engaging, effective, and fun choices for players? Let's talk about it today on Draw 5 Move 5. Hey everyone, and welcome to the table. My name is Gabe, and this is Draw 5 Move 5, a show where we draw connections between the mechanics behind our favorite games. Games, in their most abstract sense, are just a series of rules. The player can do whatever they can think of within those guidelines. The rules are like an ocean, and the player is given a vessel with which to sail upon these waters, allowing them to interact with the game. This vessel, this vehicle, is the interface between the player and the game. However, many of my favorite games give you a vehicular choice. We are instead given the tools to craft our own vehicle, our own vessel, that will allow us to interact with the sea of possibilities the rules open to us. I've done a whole video talking about the balance and prevalence of these choices from a player perspective, but today we're looking at vehicular choices from a designer's perspective. And I know that vehicular choices is a funny sounding term, but calling it a character choice doesn't really fit. Character choices are the kinds of decisions we can make in a game, like how to take on an enemy, solve a puzzle, or interact with an NPC. And this concept applies to so many more genres than traditional character builders like RPGs. It applies to trading card games and kart racers and so much more, and it's not really fair to smash them all together under character choices. We're not just building characters here, we're designing vehicles our players will use to interact with the game, so bear with me on this one. There are 4 core tenets to any effective, fun, and engaging vehicular choice. First, the choice should feel familiar. Most choices we give our players can be grouped into a few styles or types, because categories make the initial decisions easier and incline players to try related options later. Second, it needs to offer something new to the player. How this choice functions, despite any similarities to others overall, should be unique. Third, it needs to be flavorful. There should be a theme or design that makes it engaging and that is supported by its mechanics, which adds to its individuality. Nailing these 3 ideas, familiarity, uniqueness, and flavor, will create a strong baseline for any vehicular choice. From here, the 4th tenet is used to refine these ideas into a working and balanced form, the tenet of function. The idea needs to work as intended and be balanced with other available choices to a player, so that no choice feels definitively best or worst. When all of these elements have been fine-tuned, we've created a vehicular choice that our players will want to try, and there's an overall level of satisfaction we want players to have with the choices we design for them. Mike Mearls, the franchise creative director for Dungeons & Dragons and co-designer of 5th edition, has said that he and the team strive for over 80% positive feedback and at most 10% negative feedback on their designs before they're officially published. I think that's a fantastic benchmark to try and hit with designs we create. These core vehicular design principles are all things I've learned by listening to and watching Mearls on Mike Mearls' Happy Fun Hour. If you want more insight into the design behind not only Dungeons & Dragons, but concepts that can be extrapolated for tons of other games, I highly recommend checking it out. The link is in the description below and in the card in the upper right corner. At the simplest level, we can see these ideas applied to single character choices, such as in Overwatch. Rather than build their own characters to fight with, players instead pick from an ever-growing roster of over 30 characters. It's reasonable to assume that after introducing 9 additional heroes, some of these new characters wouldn't be up to snuff, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We'll take a look at the newest hero, currently in public testing, Sigma. Overwatch has 3 main categories a hero can fall under: tank, damage, and support. Sigma falls under tank and employs mechanics similar to those others in his class. Tanks tend to have higher health and defenses, and their goal is to stay on the front lines, protecting allies and themselves with shields while making heavy hits on nearby enemies. Sigma fits. He has 2 shields, a primary projectile attack with a range of 20 meters, and another weapon attack to support the first. His assets are similar to those of other tanks. Next, the way in which Sigma's abilities function is significantly different than other tanks. His primary weapon attack, Hyperspheres, launches 2 spheres that explode after reaching a distance of 20 meters from him. These do significantly more damage than most other tanks on a hit, and is comparable to some damage class heroes like Pharah and Reaper. The type of weapon is more comparable to the orbs used by support class heroes like Zenyatta and Moira, rather than continual fire or short burst attacks of other tanks. In addition, these spheres will bounce off inanimate objects, allowing trick shots around corners and opposing barriers. Sigma's secondary attack is another projectile that deals massive damage on a hit, which again is very uncharacteristic of how other tanks deal damage. Meanwhile, his experimental shield, one way in which he protects himself and allies, can be deployed at a variety of locations instead of directly in front of him, and doesn't regenerate until it's been destroyed, unlike other tanks. And his additional protective ability, Kinetic Grasp, allows him to stop most incoming projectiles in front of him and convert them to shields. It's one of the few abilities he has that feels similar to another tank, D.Va. His defenses are on the low end for a tank. All of these elements together create a hero that offers new and exciting gameplay options and feels unique compared to the other tanks in his class. Of course, all of these are done in a thematic bend. Sigma is a scientist who studied the concepts of gravity and black holes, attempting to harness them for the good of humanity. However, one experiment went horribly wrong, creating a miniature black hole that bent his mind, and with training after being freed from his quarantine by the shady organization known as Talon, to bend gravity itself to his whims. Every element of Sigma's character serves the theme of an aged scientist gone mad. He's built a suit to control his power, one that provides a heroic-looking physique with a sinister appearance. His dialogue portrays him as a cold and calculating scientist, but he'll occasionally break out into fits of madness, and his abilities are gravity and field based, from his hyperspheres to literally combining chunks of Earth into a projectile to hurl at the opponent, and his final skill that alters gravity within an area, granting him flight and trapping foes in the air to be attacked, then slammed down. The mechanics are all designed with the character's overall theme in mind. Sigma has the first 3 core tenets nailed. Familiarity in his role as a tank, uniqueness in the way he plays, and flavor in his strong scientific and gravitational themes. The public tests will give Blizzard, the game's developer, the feedback it needs to balance Sigma and tweak how his abilities function, which will ensure he doesn't completely outclass the other tanks, and give him the 4th tenet needed for a great vehicular choice. Beyond single-choice rosters, we can see these principles applied in the Dungeons & Dragons character design process. With the ability to choose a race, class, and subclass in addition to customizing tons of other factors about your character, every player's vehicle will be unique. Each of these vehicular choices, however, need to be appealing and effective for the player. Looking at races, for example, the elf is a common choice that many gamers enjoy. Why is this? Even in the 3 or so pages that speak on elves, an understanding of their culture and character is presented to the players. Graceful creatures of Fey ancestry that live for many centuries, the elf is human enough, familiar enough for players to relate to, and those who frequent the fantasy genre find them even more familiar. The abilities of the elf are useful but not overpowering. A resistance to being charmed and an immunity to magical sleep, and a shorter trance they enter in place of sleep, are symbols of both their Fey ancestry and mental acuity. Their bonus to dexterity shows their graceful movements. Meanwhile, each subrace feels related to the overarching elf, but has its own distinct flavor that makes it unique. Magic as an additional language for the more intelligent high elf, increased mobility and natural camouflage in the wilds for the survivalist wood elf, and darker magics, stronger dark vision, and sunlight sensitivity for the cave-dwelling and malicious drow, as well as additional weapons for each. Both the overall race and subraces meet our 4 tenets of familiarity, uniqueness, flavor, and function, as they should. The elf and all 3 of its initial subraces, along with all other players' handbook options and content, went through intensive playtesting to make sure the designer's ideas were coming through and working as intended before 5th edition was officially released. While there are other races that can share some of these abilities, such as weapon training, dark vision, and innate magic, the elf stands on its own, apart from other races, because of the thematic significance these abilities have. The same level of care is applied to the classes in the game, ensuring that classes which can fill similar roles still feel fun and unique. One could argue that someone using the fighter class at close range works the same as a barbarian, but the flavor and mechanics of each make the warriors feel distinctly different. Fighters focus on martial prowess, skill, and training, and their abilities such as fighting style and indomitable reflect this, while the barbarian focuses on primal reflexes and raw, overpowering might, as is evident by their rage and reckless attack abilities. And at the most complex level, we can look at games of deck construction, namely trading card games, where every aspect of the game is a vehicular choice, with millions of possible combinations. Every time a new batch of cards are released for play, there can be anywhere from 60 to over 400 new cards available depending on the game. As such, as important as it is to make well-balanced, unique, and effective player options, there are some cards that will inevitably fall through the cracks or be lifted to major glory. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, a good example of this is the comparison of the Thunder Dragon archetype released in last October's Soul Fusion set and this year's Simorgh archetype released in last month's Rising Rampage set. Both of these archetypes were modeled after a single card from the first few years of the game, Thunder Dragon and Simorgh Bird of Divinity, respectively. Both archetypes take themes from the original cards and expand upon them for each of their new monsters, making them feel familiar. All of the Thunder Dragon monsters can discard themselves as the original Thunder Dragon did to activate an effect. Additionally, the archetype introduces 2 new fusion monsters akin to the original twin-headed Thunder Dragon, albeit with powerful effects unlike the original. The Simorgh archetype, meanwhile, continues on from the few original Simorgh birds, with effects related to normal and tribute summoning and locking down the opponent's ability to use spells and traps. While negation and floodgate effects run rampant in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, the way in which each deck reaches these themed interactions is unique, and each deck is loaded with flavor. Who wouldn't want to use powerful birds of legend or destructive dragons imbued with lightning? But while Thunder Dragon is an archetype that has seen competitive play since release, Simorgh is not likely to have the same impact. Why is this? Each deck hit the first 3 tenets well, but it's the 4th that causes a problem. Thunder Dragon's effects are all very powerful, and the deck has many tools to accomplish the same goal. Their most powerful monsters do not require resources to use their abilities, are easy to access since they're in the extra deck, can protect themselves, and can gain card advantage off of that protection. Comparatively, the Simorgh monsters, while they functionally work, all have very fair effects. Very few cards gain advantage. Their boss monsters are in the main deck, meaning they have to be searched or drawn, and all of their most powerful effects have costs that make it very difficult to maintain control of the game while staying up on advantage. The Thunder Dragon archetype's power is on par with other competitive decks, but the Simorgh archetype is below average. This goes to show how important hitting all 4 tenets is for a vehicular choice to be effective. Creating a good vehicular design isn't easy, but these 4 key components, familiarity, uniqueness, flavor, and function, provide us an easy template to start building from. These elements underlie every effective design that a player can choose from, whether they're picking a whole character, a part of one, or assembling an entire deck of unique choices. And giving this power of choice to players inspires them. It inspires me and many others who are interested in game design, because beyond this template, it's up to the creativity of the designer and later the player to craft something that thousands, if not millions, will enjoy. Good vehicular choices beget happy players and happy designers. Thank you so much for watching. You have my humble and eternal gratitude. What did you think of the conversation? Do you think these 4 tenets are an effective template for creating fun, effective, and unique vehicular options for players? And are there any favorite examples you want to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let's keep this discussion rolling down in the comments. If you enjoyed the conversation and you want to hear more from me, subscribe and ding-a-ling that notification bell so you never miss an update. I'm putting out new videos every week on games and gaming mechanics, and dropping a like lets me know you want to see more. My name is Gabe, this is Draw 5 Move 5, and until next week, go have a good game.